Hi, I'm Conor Battigan from Sandyford Business District, and you're all very welcome to the Sandyford Business District Innovation Week. It's hard to believe that this is day number 3. It's our afternoon session. My mind is still spinning from the session we had earlier on this morning around artificial intelligence and machine intelligence. This afternoon's session is on digital futurology. We have a great lineup of speakers and contributors. And first up, we have John Shaw, founder, Quantum Computing. John, an executive technology leader in digital transformation. John has 20 years experience delivering technology solutions in healthcare, FinTech, logistics, manufacturing, energy, and utilities. John is an expert at building successful relationships, capabilities, and culture. He excels at bringing out the best in people by listening and sharing the big picture. Operating with an agile decision-making style, he will rapidly catalyse change by turning ideas into actions. John Shaw, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing about digital wellness.
Thank you. So let me see now. Hopefully I can show my slides. Okay, all right. My slides are moving. That's good. What I want to talk about today is quantum computing, and when we talk about digital wellness, the impact that quantum computing is going to have in healthcare. So when we talk about digital wellness, we're talking about how digital technologies are going to start making a major impact, an increasingly beneficial impact in healthcare. So I want to leave you with 3 thoughts at the end of my 20 minutes. Firstly, digitization is already disrupting our world in major ways. Quantum computing is the latest technology to bring better ways of working. And by 2030, quantum computing will be accelerating vaccine discovery timelines. It'll be assisting in predicting pandemic outcomes, and it will lead us to a better and a healthier world. So, quantum supremacy. Back in October of last year, a major breakthrough was achieved in the world of quantum computing. A team of Google engineers using a quantum computer were able to execute a task in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, which, if that same task was performed on a conventional computer, in fact, if it had been performed on the world's most powerful supercomputer, would have taken approximately 10,000 years to execute, 5.2 billion minutes. 3 minutes versus 5.2 billion minutes. So there's definitely something about quantum computing that we all need to hear about, understand, and then see how can it affect our own businesses, our own context. So I'll talk about this by beginning with a look at accelerated digitization, and then move on to the more specific topic of quantum computing and how it will affect healthcare in the years ahead. So today is the 21st of October, 2020, only it's not. We're in 2025. Today is actually 21st of October, 2025. COVID has pushed us 5 years into the future. Everybody is working from home. All our staff, all our customers, where they can, they're working from home. Digitization has massively accelerated since this COVID pandemic began. And our health, our wellness is now a priority for our families, for our parents, for our children, for all our loved ones and our neighbors and friends. We are now acutely aware of our health. And of course, healthcare costs have been rising for years. In fact, this year, the US is on track to spending 25% of its GDP on healthcare, about $10,000 per capita. So COVID-19 has exposed significant weaknesses in how the world approaches healthcare. Before COVID, we would have thought about risk in all our businesses, but the kinds of risks that we would have been thinking about would have been things like cybercrime and increased regulatory demands, perhaps. But the black swan event of COVID-19 blew all of those risks out of the water in terms of scale. Also, before COVID, the world was already spending a lot on digitization. In 2019, about 3.7 trillion US dollars. With over 5 million smartphone users across the world and nearly 4 4 billion active social media users. So digitization was already disrupting. COVID has accelerated that disruption. Controversially, Gary Vaynerchuk 2 years ago said that within 5 years, the shop is dead in North America. And indeed, long before COVID, many shopping malls in America were seeing declining visitor numbers. The Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stone. Things come to an end for all kinds of reasons. Online shopping has taken over more and more, and COVID has accelerated that trend. Another trend, telemedicine. So back in January, in the US, about 11% of people would receive their GP consultation over Zoom. That number is now closer to 50%, and it's on track to being 80% by the end of the year. So indeed, the future is already here, only it's not evenly distributed. COVID has been the most disruptive event since the Second World War, but some organizations were there ready to help their customers in a time of immense stress. I mentioned Zoom. Microsoft is another company that has given huge value to organizations in this time. Netflix have seen record-breaking profits, and Amazon now have 4 warehouses in Ireland and are soon to begin to launch their vehicles on the road. We'll soon see the Amazon trucks in Dublin. So digitization has been driving huge economic change for quite a while. Within a decade, China will be the world's largest economy in GDP terms, and India will be number 3. And essentially what's happening to China and India is that they are returning to their natural state of being the 2 largest economies in the world, which they were for most of human history, certainly up to 1600 AD. And the education, the STEM education right across the world is a major contributor to this. So we don't simply compete now with the organization 5 kilometers away or 50 kilometers away. We're now competing in a world 24/7, and your competitor can be anywhere. Digitization means that distance is no longer a barrier for any service that you might need to get. So quantum computing is arriving in this world of major disruption. COVID has accelerated trends already well underway. So quantum computing is now the technology that can take a certain class of problems to a more efficient solution. Quantum computing exists within the broader field of applied quantum mechanics. Now, I'm not going to use the 20 minutes to talk in depth about quantum mechanics, but already research is well underway in a whole range of fields around quantum mechanics and its application in business. The entire field is just over 100 years old. Max Planck won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918 for his work on this field. Essentially, we live in a universe built in peculiar ways. We have I suppose an instinctive understanding of basic physics, gravity, and the sun comes up in the morning, the earth goes around the sun. We have a basic understanding of physics. But when you look at things that are very, very small or very, very large, you see other strange things that are beyond your intuition or your instinctive understanding. And quantum computing avails of that strangeness. Specifically, if we compare classical computing, all our mobile phones, all the technology being used today for this conference, it's all based on binary logic, 1s and 0s. All the calculations are based on that principle. Quantum computing avails of a peculiar aspect of reality, which is that you can form the calculations based on probabilities, a probability surface rather than 1s and 0s. And this field is less than 20 years old. From a computing hardware perspective, but it's utilizing a reality that's beyond normal perception. And for a long time, it was a curiosity rather than something that could have practical application. But more recently, organizations like D-Wave, based in Vancouver, have been building machines that are becoming faster and bigger, more powerful. Quantum computing uses a branch of mathematics and a branch of physics, which allows calculations to run hundreds of millions of times faster than conventional computing. An organization which is making this hardware more accessible is an organization. There are many organizations, one of which is Horizon Quantum Computing, based in Singapore, run by an Irish guy, Joe Fitzsimons. And his mission, his company's mission, is to allow us to use quantum computing in a way without realizing it. So it's presented to us in familiar apps on our smartphones or on our PCs, and the calculations are being performed somewhere else in a way that we don't need to understand. So this would be equivalent to the reality that most of us don't actually understand how a conventional computer works, but we know how to use the software. And in the same way, making quantum computing accessible is going to be a big part of the challenge. Making the software easy to understand and use and get business value from, rather than confuse everybody with the hardware. So what are the kinds of things you can do with a quantum computer? Well, for example, Volkswagen are currently running a project in Beijing to optimize a taxi fleet's routing plan. Now this, for those familiar in the world of writing code, this would be known as the traveling salesman's problem. Now that sounds like maybe a simple problem to solve, but in fact, it's a very, very difficult problem to solve on conventional computing. For example, if a company had 20 shipments on 4 delivery routes, there are actually 1 trillion possibilities for a computer to rank in terms of trying to optimize which is the best route to pick. And if you add more routes and more shipments, it becomes increasingly difficult and indeed near impossible for a classical computer to run the algorithm to a successful answer. So quantum computing is going to be focusing in on these types of problems to save businesses money in the logistics costs and delivery costs. Overall, there are 5 domains for use cases with quantum computing. The early focus is going to be on things like chemistry, how complex molecules interact with each other. Very, very difficult to model on classical computing. And then from there, we'll move on to optimization type problems like the one I mentioned with Volkswagen, and then machine learning problems, material science problems, and then move on up into problems we can't even imagine. So the analogy would be with electricity. So electricity in 1900 was a new thing. The early electric kettles looked very like stove kettles. But by 1960, electricity was powering television and computers, things that would have been unimaginable in 1900. So in the same way, quantum computing opens up the possibility to solve problems which we can't even easily describe right now. So how fast is a quantum computer? Well, one way to answer that is to think about the analogy between how fast is a car and how fast is a jet aircraft. So your car is very useful if you want to drive down to the nearest shop to get a newspaper, but it wouldn't be a very useful thing to travel across the Atlantic or go further afield. A jet aircraft would be a pointless device to use to go shopping for a newspaper. And in the same way, quantum computing comes into its own for a certain class of problems where you're dealing with very, very large computational challenges. So when you look at, for example, number factoring, when you get above a certain number of digits, around about 1,000 digits, classical computing becomes highly inefficient. And quantum computing is able to get answers in seconds and in a few minutes, which would take millions of years with a conventional computer. The kinds of benefits we're going to see things like faster DNA sequencing. We're going to see predictive health, faster discovery of new drugs, better decision support. We're going to see other things that we can't, as I say, already imagine, because it opens up possibilities. As people move into the sector and get to understand it, they'll start to see other challenges that can be solved. 2 examples of algorithms. Just to talk about the mathematics briefly, just as the physics has developed, that we can now build the hardware, without the mathematics and without the algorithms, the hardware is kind of useless. And Grover's algorithm is one of the two main algorithms currently available for quantum computing platforms. So this is a way to calculate the mean of a large set of numbers. So we can all do that on pen and paper for small quantities of numbers, and classical computers can do it for reasonable amounts of numbers as well to calculate the mean. But when you get into very, very large sets of numbers, you need a different mathematics to solve the problem. So you have a different mathematics with different hardware. So think about it in this way. You need to have software from somewhere like Horizon Quantum Computing Company to show you the world of quantum, how to interact with it. But you need to have an understanding of the mathematics to make sense of how to write the algorithms. And you need to have the hardware using the quantum mechanical effects to get a result. So these three layers have to work together to achieve this. Another example of an algorithm is an algorithm for decrypting encrypted data. So when you're using WhatsApp, all the data is encrypted. The most conventional way to do encryption in the modern world is with 2048-bit encryption. Sorry to sound technical for those who don't know the background on this, but the significant point is that a quantum computer can crack RSA encrypted code in 36 minutes, which would take 300 million years to crack with the fastest conventional computer. So there's definitely something to watch out for here. So the next wave of cybercrime perhaps will avail of this type of technology. So you get into an escalation war that if you're not encrypting using quantum encryption, you're exposed. Therefore, as a new technology emerges, unfortunately, nefarious players come into the play as well. So in healthcare, how can quantum computing help? Well, if you look across all of the technologies that are emerging to improve digital wellness, quantum computing is one of those. Quantum computing is something which is being toyed with for vaccine discovery, for analysis of how different chemicals interact, but it's going to become mainstream within the next 5 years. When you look at use cases overall for quantum computing, there are already, in North America, there are already over 50 organizations who currently derive income from providing quantum computing solutions, mainly in financial services. But if you look at this league table, you can see how the pharma sector is moving into this as well, and also for medical devices. So we're going to see a lot more use cases emerge as more and more people become familiar with the technology, and as the technology becomes more reliable, and as the quantum computing machines become bigger and faster. So, for example, if we take drug discovery and genomics, I mentioned already, simulating chemical interactions is very difficult at the moment. Typically, researchers might spend 12 years comparing interactions and effect of different drugs on a range of diseases. And that's why most drug discovery is performed in what's known as a wet lab, the traditional cycle. Being able to digitize that is very difficult with classical computing. In fact, it's not possible. Similarly, when we talk about looking at possible gene variants, a quantum computer can look at vast numbers of possibilities in seconds or minutes in a way that isn't even possible on a classical computer. As the famous Richard Feynman said, nature is based on quantum mechanics. So to simulate nature, you need a quantum computer. So what's next? What's coming next? Well, quantum computing is becoming faster and faster. The first machines emerged in the late 90s, 2-qubit machines in a research project at MIT. But we're now getting into machines that are up at 128 qubits and beyond. The Google experiment I mentioned earlier was conducted on a 54-qubit machine, for example. I mentioned that problems of today that quantum computing will solve will be the problems that we're familiar with on classical computing, such as cryptography, financial services optimization problems, logistics optimization problems. But as you move further and further into the future, the kinds of problems that will be solved are beyond our current limit of thinking. And in relation to revenue, I mean, this is not a huge industry currently. So last year, the total revenue in this sector would have been in the region of about $120 million. Within a decade, that's estimated to grow to about $9 billion as more and more organizations adopt the technology. So to get involved, we have a group, Quantum Computing Ireland. We have about 85 members. And these are people who are, I suppose, initially enthusiasts or people who are thinking about this for their business, and in particular, the healthcare sector. And you're very welcome to join that group, our group. So in conclusion, digitization is already disrupting our world. Quantum computing is the latest technology to bring better ways of working. And within a decade, quantum computing will be having a big impact on digital wellness. Thank you.
John Shaw, founder, Quantum Computing. Thank you very much for your contribution and your insights. It's been, I suppose, it's commonly discussed that COVID has accelerated research, it's accelerated technology, innovation. You've put a number on it, 5 years. So we're living in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen more changes in organizations in the space of 3 or 4 months than could have happened in 3 or 4 years. Look how fast everybody adopted Zoom. Look at how Amazon's business has leapt forward. It's incredible how businesses have had to adapt. So it's a time of great disruption, but there is no going back to the world of before COVID. You know, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. So there is no going back. Yeah. The Steam Age didn't end because we ran out of steam. Right?
Yeah, and it's incredible. You know, COVID, it's created a lot of pain, a lot of sadness, but it's also, there's been a lot of, benefits as well. And, every cloud has a silver lining, but it's not taking away the seriousness and the sadness that it's caused. John Shaw, thank you very much for your contribution. You're going to stay with us, and we'll have some Q&A at the end of the session. So it's just a reminder to everybody that you can submit your questions on slido.com. You can also send them in by email to events@sandyford.ie. Next up, we have Ken Finnegan, CEO at Trinity Tangent, partnering with businesses to create innovations and provide investment in technology. Ken Finnegan also contributes to national government policy with regards to emerging trend identification, priority areas for investment and investment allocation. He has global experience in research, development, and in innovation in high-value technology organizations, and regularly contributes to a variety of business and industry journals, including Silicon Republic, Irish Tech News, as well as making presentations on technology innovation around the world. Ken Finnegan, CEO, Trinity Tangent, you're going to talk to us. First of all, you're very welcome, and we're delighted to have you. You're going to talk to us about innovation hubs.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here at the Innovation Week, Sandyford's Innovation Week. Welcome to my office, aka the spare room, aka the golden pineapple room as well. So yeah, today I want to talk about, well, first of all, it's my name's Ken Finnegan. I'm the CEO of Tangent, which is Trinity's Ideas Workspace. I'm going to talk about the evolution, if you want, of the Innovation Hub, but also the idea that innovation is a mentality and not just a location. So my first slide here, you can see kind of like the idea of the evolution of the office. So the first kind of, I guess, collaborative environment that was established was a Frank Lloyd Wright Larkin administration building in Buffalo nearly over 100 years, nearly 120 years ago. At the time, it was one of the most innovative buildings in the world. It was the first building that had air conditioning, and it was looked at the kind of like the front runner in terms of co-working, office space, etc. As time went on, then there was the Johnson's Wax building in Wisconsin, built in 1939, and you can see from the little picture there, the thumbnail, that it was open plan, it was conducive for people coming together. So that idea of random interactions where innovation can happen. 1958, the Seagram building was built in New York. This was the first building of its kind made from metal and glass, and it was the most expensive building of the day. It cost $41 million to build. Then we evolved into kind of like probably into a kind of the depressing 60s when it came to office workspaces. So you can see that little thumbnail there as well. It's called the Bureau Landschaft Office, or the Office Landscape. Thankfully, we've evolved from that. Hot desking became a thing back in the 1980s, and it was borrowed from a term from submariners that shared their bunks back in the. It was established in the 1980s, essentially. Co-working then became hot back in 1999, and co-working has evolved. Like, we see so many co-working spaces, not just around the world, but Ireland, they're taking off as well, and they're evolving as well. And then private organizations like Google and Wikipedia adopted co-working trend back in 2007. So we're seeing a lot of co-working spaces, and I guess innovation is happens in these places. And I'm going to talk about kind of like today, I want to talk about the idea that innovation is more to do with culture and attitude, because right now we're living in our spare room, essentially in your pajamas. So a lot of us are working from our home offices. So I'd like to give a definition for what is innovation. So creativity is thinking up of new things, right? It's not innovation. Innovation is doing things. So simply put, innovation is the manifestation of an idea into reality. So taking an idea and essentially generating impact from it. There's an equation there which I really, really like, and I'm going to explain what this equation is, because it's essentially the key to innovation, or the beginning, the first steps into innovation, essentially. It was developed by a professor in Buffalo University's back in the 1960s, Professor Ruth Noller. She was a mathematician by trade, if you want, and she was fascinated by creativity. So she studied creativity for years and developed this equation, essentially, as a mathematician would. So C represents creative behavior. So how do you essentially arrive at creative behavior? So creative behavior it's a function of knowledge. So you need to have some in-depth knowledge. Imagination is key to innovation, and then evaluation. How can you measure? How can you see if you've been successful in terms of your creativity and products, services, etc. Now, the one thing that nullifies all of these, if the attitude in an organization, or if your own personal attitude is, oh, we've always done it that way, or it can't be done, it doesn't matter. You will not achieve creative behavior. So attitude is essentially the key concept, if you want, here in terms from a creative and innovation perspective. Attitude is culture, essentially. Knowledge, imagination, and evaluation are all tools, and can all be taught, and that's essentially where what we do in Tangent. So why is innovation and entrepreneurship become so necessary? So as John alluded to there, technology and technology trends are ever evolving, and it's really, really at times challenging to kind of like keep up to date and informed of what's going on. I just have a few of the trends there on the screen. In a previous life, I was a chief technologist in IDA Ireland, and it was my job to promote Ireland for different tech trends and demonstrate the substance and the talent that exists here in Ireland. So artificial intelligence, it's a very, very hot topic. It's promising to provide solutions that we've never seen before. We've also kind of like, if you look at macroeconomics, we also see and macro trends as well. We also see a change in like longevity of life, for example. So people are living longer and they're working in jobs for longer as well. The family, we're looking at nuclear families, for example. So less children are being had. So people need to focus on financial stability as they grow older as well. John was talking about our robotics in healthcare. But healthcare is ripe for solutions. We're progressing massively in healthcare. Automation in manufacturing, working from home. So, and I think actually it's coming back to John's point about where we are in terms of being 5 years into the future. I think the entire world is realizing that we can get our jobs done from home, and our home doesn't necessarily mean we have to be in the city, or we can essentially work from anywhere in the world. And that was a trend we've seen like for a long time, but definitely COVID has accelerated that. And then finally, it's like business model innovation. So we've seen over the past 10 years, we've seen the gig economy rise. We've seen lots of new different types of business models emerge. It's just, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that change is constantly happening and at speed. So I'm not a big fan of this slide per se, but I use it as a kind of like just to illustrate or demonstrate kind of like none of these companies existed 20 years ago, even if they existed 15 years ago, some of them didn't. But they have been massive disruptors. And even these organizations themselves are constantly innovating. They're constantly looking at new products and services, new sectors, new geographies, and they're all familiar to us. And it's just, as I say, an illustration of the speed at which change is happening. And this is kind of like, I guess, technical side of things. So the speed of change, the speed of innovation. Innovation itself is we use it as a term, and it can mean lots of different things to people, but essentially it is the speed of change. On the left-hand graph here, you can see what we call the S-curve of innovation. So at the bottom of the S, you'll see the early adopters, the people that buy a new technology. They're the guys that stand outside the Apple store wanting to buy the brand new phone the night before or the week before. Then you've got people like me who will adopt a new technology in its growth phase. And then you have a maturity point where that new technology is coming to its end of life, essentially. And that's the window of innovation. That's where companies need to innovate. Now, 100 years ago, the S-curves were a good bit of distance between them in terms of time. So you could innovate, you could wait a few years, 10 years or something, whatever the amount of time was, and then innovate and develop a new product or service. On the right-hand side, you can see these S-curves have gotten closer and closer and closer. And essentially, from what I understand, for example, an iPhone, they're working already on the second, next 2 generations ahead when they're releasing this one. So it's the pace of change is incredible, and the need to adapt to that change is immense. So people in organizations who learn to adapt versus those who choose to become overwhelmed by the pace of change in the world will enjoy greater success and personal satisfaction. They will also accept that this change is inevitable, and acceptance will liberate them from fear. So that gets back to my equation that I mentioned earlier on, the attitude. If you embrace change, if you embrace the idea that things are going to change, life becomes easier, and you'll have a fantastic personal culture, but in an organization, you need to develop that culture to embrace change, to be agile, to be adaptable, and also to be resilient, because sometimes, or a lot of times, innovations don't work out, and that's fine, and we'll talk about that in a second. So how do we adapt? So for the organization, and we work with a lot of organizations in Tangent in terms of developing their culture. So they need to encourage and develop that entrepreneurial mindset and an innovative culture in their organizations to empower all staff. And I think it's really important to say all staff. A culture doesn't exist within one innovation team. It needs to permeate with it throughout the organization. So, for example, I think John had mentioned or was discussing the idea of quantum computing being used in the medical sector. You need to bring clinicians to the table. You need to bring administrative staff to the table. You need to bring software developers to the table. You need to bring hardware engineers to the table. And it's through that diversity and that diversity of thinking that great solutions can come up. However, so what are the steps in establishing an innovative culture within your organization? So invest in skills for innovation. So just like any hard skill, like a software engineer, like a doctor, like an accountant, there are skills that your organization should invest in, and essentially a toolkit for innovation. It's a language for innovation within your organization that the accountant can talk to the engineer, can talk to the product manager, etc. They can all have the language of innovation if you want. To generate ideas, companies must let employees know that they are open for innovation and encourage it. So again, creating the space and time for innovation to happen, to encourage innovation, to generate ideas. That idea of creativity, develop creativity within the organization. Give staff the space to work on ideas. So innovation needs time, and often employees feel they have no time to spare. And especially during COVID, I've had a lot of conversations with organizations and individuals working in different roles. In Trinity, we are obviously an academic institution, and we do have some international partners. But having conversations with some of my peers and colleagues and friends in international organizations, Facebook, Google, etc., it's very hard for them to switch off because they're working in international organizations. Emails come in at all times of the day. So being able to switch off and carve out time for themselves is a challenge, let alone for innovation. And that's one of the big challenges with COVID at the moment. It's very transactional. If I need to talk to somebody, I'm not going to have a chance encounter with them at the coffee machine and have a chat. I call them up specifically to ask a question. So we need to carve out strategically a time and place, if you want, whether it's virtual or physical, for innovation to happen, especially now. Incentivize innovation. So be it monetary or otherwise, the best way to keep employees trying hard and working towards success is to reward effort. I think one of the best rewards for innovation, if you're developing products and services or efficiencies within your organization, is obviously recognition, but people get pride out of seeing their products and services being developed and used by the company. And then one of the most important areas, and one of the areas that we in Tangent kind of like definitely promote, is this idea: never fail to fail. So encourage failure in a safe environment. In a safe environment, obviously you don't want to risk your business, because this is how we learn and grow. I was lucky enough to have a conversation last year with Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter. And we were officially launching Tangent last September, 12 months, and we talked about this idea of failure in organizations, and how we need to, especially I think from an Irish perspective, we don't necessarily embrace failure, and I think we need to learn how to embrace failure in safe settings. So it's something that we do in Tangent in terms of no idea is a bad idea, evolve that idea, create minimal viable products, prototypes, and if they work, great. If they don't work, how do we evolve that idea and move to the next level? In our space in Trinity, we have written in big letters: ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. A famous quote by Beck there. I talk about this idea of innovation culture as a service. So instead of, and I guess it's something that Tangent work with organizations and students on. So instead of focusing on memorizing facts and regurgitating content, we teach our students in Tangent of all ages and at all stages, and that's really important. I'll talk about that in a sec. To focus on establishing a foundation upon which to keep learning while developing their innovative and entrepreneurial mindset. So all ages, we work with students in Trinity. Tangent is it was a strategic choice when it was being set up. We are not part of any school or specific discipline in Trinity. We are here for all students in Trinity, whether you're studying chemistry or engineering or business. We are here for all students. And when I say at all stages, so the idea of the future, when we talk about the future of work and the need for lifelong learning, we work with, as I said, organizations, SMEs, multinationals, and we work with everybody from the age of 17 all the way to the age of 70. Everybody has something to bring to the table. There is richness and diversity, and we very much embrace that. So I talked about the organization and that idea of an innovative culture within an organization. For individuals, we have to develop the capacity to keep learning, questioning, innovating, and creating throughout our lives. So this is a really nice demonstration or a walk through education, if you want, in history. So you have the depth of knowledge there, the I-shape. I-shape there is the historical kind of, like, I go to school, I go to college, I get my education. and then I've got a job for life. That's fine. That's long gone. As I mentioned earlier on, different business models, gig economies. We need to be agile, adaptable, and resilient. In Tangent, we definitely look at the T shapes. So that's the idea of having a depth of knowledge. So engineering, chemistry, whatever that depth is, medicine, for example, but to have the softer skills or the transversal skills, which is the horizontal line on the T there. So it's about developing your ability, effective communication. It's about developing critical analysis. It's about being able to maneuver a changing world. And as I said earlier on, it's about embracing change. And we look at kind of like, it's like the idea of the pie shaped and the cone shaped. That idea of like, you're not just going to have one job or one career in life. You may have multiple careers in life. And this idea is equipping people with the ability to navigate these changing careers, to understand and identify opportunity when it presents itself, and to go after it. So as a time of rapid change, a transformation in how, when, and where we learn is critical to staying on top of the game. The only solution is a commitment to lifelong learning. So I'm going to talk about Tangent for a second. As I mentioned, we're an independent unit within Trinity, working with both students and organizations throughout the country and the world, actually. The idea behind Tangent is to engage, to create an ecosystem. We educate, we incubate, and we accelerate. So it's all about the journey of an idea. It's taking an idea, whether it's to start a company, whether it's to develop a new product or service, and bring our customers and students on that journey. So Julie Cinnamon will always talk about if you can't see it, you can't be it, with regards to women in leadership. And it's the same with regards to successful entrepreneurs and innovators. So we run a lot of events. Obviously, a lot of them are virtual at the moment, but we run a lot of events to kind of develop that ecosystem, to create awareness about innovation and entrepreneurship and the success that Ireland has achieved. Inspire that idea of lifelong learning. We activate the community through events. So we run hackathons, we've got meetups, we've ideathons, anything that brings people together, that creates that diversity. And then we provide leadership and innovation and entrepreneurship. So that's the engagement side of things. It's about inspiring. It's about creating an awareness. It's about getting students and organizations excited about innovation and entrepreneurship. We educate. So at our core, we deliver programs in innovation and entrepreneurship, and we're an applied unit, by the way, as well. So we're informed by theory, but we work on real world problems. So we work with lots of organizations from across Ireland and the world, and we take innovation challenges for them, and all our students will work on those innovation challenges. So when students work in Tangent, they get an opportunity to work on genuine real world issues and not just look at the theory behind them. There's no exams. The exam essentially at the end of a module is to stand up in front of your peers with your colleagues, having worked on an innovation challenge, and present back your findings to them and demonstrate that you followed, like, for example, a design thinking methodology. So one of the innovation tools that we use. We've got certified undergraduates and postgraduate programs, professional development programs, and we're also all across Ireland as well. Currently, we're running programs in Wexford, Athlone, and in Galway as well. So we are innovative in terms of our core and what we do, but also inside of a 430-year-old institution, it's the first time Trinity has left Dublin. So we're very proud of that as well. Then the last two parts are to incubate and accelerate. This is the having been excited about an idea or being inspired by an entrepreneur and innovator. You've developed the skills within yourself through an education, and then we also provide lots of different types of platforms for students and startups to incubate and accelerate their ideas. So we have one of the best student accelerators in Europe, our Launchbox accelerator, but we also run European funded accelerators, digital health innovation, climate entrepreneurship. And I'm delighted to announce that we will be launching, should I say, an artificial intelligence accelerator early next year. So watch this space for news on that. And that idea is, again, we put individuals and companies through the funnel, and at the end of it, we'll have early stage startups, but with a product and that are ready, that are investable essentially. So it's all about generating impact, as well as I said, working with organizations. We work with organizations to help them develop their sprints and products and services as well. So we've had impact. As I mentioned, we've been around for 2 years, but we're a consolidation of lots of activities from Trinity. So lots of different innovation and entrepreneurial activities from around Trinity. I won't get into this, but you can see the numbers there. We're very proud of what we've achieved. Over 2,000 students and professionals educated in innovation and entrepreneurship. We've spun out over 130 startups, one of which sold for 60 million just earlier on this year. Food Cloud, famous company, social enterprise, founded by Isolde Ward, was the first winner of one of our accelerators as well. So look, working with Tangent is you can be rest assured that there will be impact for your organization. So to finish up, I'm reiterating that the 2020's Innovation Hub is definitely is about the attitude and culture within your organization and helping your people to achieve that attitude towards innovation and the desire to pioneer and explore. And on that note, I will say thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Ken Finnegan, Trinity Tangent, thank you very much. I love your wallpaper. Pineapples are very on trend at the moment.
Yeah, normally I have a screensaver in the background, so nobody gets to see the pineapples. So yeah, pineapples on trend this year.
Stick with the pineapples. You spoke earlier on just about offices and how they sort of changed over the decades. I recently learned that the term office is dead. It's now collaboration space. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like if you look at even from Tangent, we're in a brand new 80 million euro building. We moved in last June, 12 months. So we were only under 8 months before the pandemic struck. But we have a unique space in Trinity in that our main space can hold up to nearly 200 people for events and conferences. But we use it to bring students in. We use it to bring companies in as a collaboration space. It's the ability to bring diverse groups of people in and share ideas, explore concepts, kind of like this idea that what I was talking about creativity at the beginning. It's like when you bring people together in a safe environment, away from their office, nearly like you want to get them out of their own environment so they're not checking emails. That's when people start coming up with really creative ideas and the start of the innovation journey.
Okay, Ken Finnegan, Trinity Tangent. Thank you for your insights. You're going to stay with us and we'll deal with some Q&A towards the end of the session. You can submit your questions on slido.com and also send them in by email to events@sandyford.ie. Next up we have, I'm delighted that we have Niall Moran, Director of Technology Centre, Microsoft Ireland. With over 20 years experience in the tech industry, Niall currently runs the Dublin Technology Centre for Microsoft, where he helps customers envision how technology can drive business agility. Prior to Microsoft, Niall worked as a technology consultant and a CTO. Niall is a frequent speaker at technology and business conferences on topics such as like culture, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Niall Moran, who will discuss the future from an alternative perspective.
Thank you. I think it's easy when we think about all of this technology, and the word disruptive was used a lot today. It's easy to imagine a future that's a little bit scary. You think about quantum computing, we think about how we'd be able to do things exponentially quicker, exponentially faster than we can do today. It's really important that we do the right things. And when you think about AI, you think about how AI is infusing itself in everyday life. How is that going to look in the future? So it's really important that we do the right thing with AI as well. So it's really easy, and if you're like me and you've watched things like Black Mirror, Connected, or Social Dilemma on Netflix, It's really easy to envision a future that's not terribly nice or positive from a human point of view. So today I want to consider an alternative perspective on this. And there's two things that I would suggest we need to do. Number one, right now, we need to start looking at how responsible we are around technology, our ethics around technology, and that's really important that we start that now. And I think every business needs to take that on, not just the Microsofts and Googles of the world. I'm not going to dive too deep into our responsible AI framework, but that is a really important piece of work that Microsoft is doing right now. The second thing I would suggest I'm going to talk about today in more depth, we have some significant challenges on the planet right now. We've pandemic, we've got global warming, we've got sustainability. These are the things we should focus our efforts on. And if we focus our efforts on these, this is how we will develop an alternative perspective on what the future could look like for the human race. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. And I'm going to talk about AI because I don't see this as a disruptive technology. I just see it as a technology that's currently infused into pretty much everything that we do. We may not realize that, but it is. And AI has been around for quite a while as well. It's been around for decades. So it's hard to describe it as something that's disrupting our society. But it is slowly but surely changing society, and it is slowly but surely enhancing what we do, as well as taking away from what we do in certain circumstances. And just to kind of level set on where we are at with AI, like I said, it's been around for decades, but it's really only in the last few years that we've broken ground in AI in very specific areas we call cognitive capabilities, areas where we can automate what humans do. So breaking ground in these areas means meeting or surpassing human parity. And these are industry-wide standardized tests that Microsoft have broken ground in over the last 4 years. And this is a really important message. It's really only in the last few years that we've broken this ground. So we're at this kind of tipping point around AI, and it's really important that we get it right going forward. This is an example of one area that we've broken ground in the last 2 months only. And this is the idea that we can really understand what's going on in a photo. We've had photo recognition, object detection for quite a while now. But the difference between identifying an object in a photograph or an image and actually understanding what's going on in the image is a huge leap forward in terms of deep learning and AI. To be able to do that, we need to understand the context of what's going on in the image. And this is a groundbreaking research that's only really gotten to human parity in the last 2 months. So this is the ability to take contextual captions out of images. And think about this from the point of view of accessibility. Think about this from the point of view of automating the process of creating alternate text for images on websites, or for describing to somebody with a visual impairment what's going on in front of them in an image or in a video. Okay? And it's the difference between, for example, if you look at some of these examples, okay, we see a fruit with some leaves. Okay, that doesn't tell us a whole lot. It's accurate, and that's what our vision AI can do for us right now. It can tell us that it sees some fruit. But telling us that it's a peach on a particular branch in a tree is a different context. Okay, telling us that the burger has lettuce, that has tomatoes, that's a very different context. So this level of capability is now here, and as I say, is beyond human parity right now. And what that means is we can use this technology to really automate a lot of stuff that humans would have to do. And we'll see some examples of that. Now this brings me into an area we call AI for good. And one example of that is our Seeing AI app. And this takes all of that technology and that groundbreaking research that we've been working on for decades. And it makes it available in a very simple app that people with visual impairments can use. In fact, in the AppleVis Golden Apples Awards, it's won in the last 3 years in a row, either as best app or best assistive app. And all of those services that I talked about earlier on, all of that AI capability is wrapped up in this app, and you can download it from the App Store. I'm just going to run a video now just to give you an example of some of the detail of how this app works.
An experiment to describe your surroundings with Seeing AI.
Seeing AI is an ongoing research project. And in the app, we've also included some of our more experimental features, though you have to turn those on in settings. One of these is the ability to describe a general scene. When you take a photo, the algorithm detects the objects that it can see and tries to find the relationship between them and describe this in a natural sentence. It's still learning, kind of like a kid learns to speak. So, as it learns more things in the world around it, the descriptions will get better over time. Here's an example photo I took earlier.
Processing. Probably a man sitting on a couch using a laptop. Take picture. Processing. A bus that is parked on the side of the road. Button. Take picture. Processing. Probably a box filled with different types of food on a table. Button.
This is just a glimpse at the possibilities of artificial intelligence, and I can't wait to see where this goes in the future.
Microsoft logo appears.
So that's just a really simple example of an app that can be used for good. That example there of captioning images will now be rolled out into that app. And that's the great thing about AI, is it continuously evolves and continuously learns. So as we improve the research, as we add more and more capability to our cognitive capabilities, we can bring those to those apps and other apps and bring them to our customers so that we can build more apps that help humans. Here's another example of AI for good. And AI for Good is a program that Microsoft offer to support businesses, whether they're startup businesses, academic institutes that are looking to use AI for good, use AI for Earth, for humans, for sustainability, or whatever example. We've already invested about 100 million in this particular program. And on the screen, you can see the link where you can actually go and apply for grants. And these grants come in the form of access to cloud-based resources for AI or technical resource and engineering resources within Microsoft to help. And a couple of examples of these, WildMe, who's developed open source platforms for identifying wildlife. This is really important for the preservation of our wildlife, okay? And the first step in doing this, the first step of preserving wildlife is to actually track them, to understand how many zebras, for example. We have examples of snow leopards as well. How many do we have? Where are the clusters? How can we track their travel and population? And typically how that's done is through video footage. And video footage, hours and hours of video footage tracked by humans. Now, if you think about it, if we have vision AI that can recognize a zebra in these videos automatically, then we can automate that entire process. So this is a great example of how, now that we've got vision AI that's reached human parity, we can automate a lot of this capability. The same with OceanMind, who are trying to control illegal fishing in certain oceans. They can track the movement of vessels, but how can they track the activity on the vessels? How can we decide if it looks like somebody is fishing on that vessel as opposed to not fishing on a vessel? So they're using custom vision AI to train the AI models to really understand what is the behavior of fisher when people are fishing on these boats, and using that to alert authorities about illegal fishing. A couple of other areas that are really important going forward. If you think about sustainability, Microsoft have committed to be carbon negative within the next 10 years. At the same time, we're scaling out our data centers globally, adding more and more data centers literally on a monthly basis. And when we look at some of the energy usage in the data centers, we can see huge inefficiencies. So for example, storage. We're using the same capabilities, the same technology in storage that we have been for years, and it's really inefficient. First of all, storage disks don't last terribly long, so we're constantly having to replace them. We're constantly having to destroy them for data sensitivity reasons. Also, because of the reliability of disks, we have to replicate data all the time. So we're constantly replicating data. which means data is being duplicated. So all of the energy that's required to store data is also being duplicated as well. So what if we could store data in a much more resilient way, in a way that took a lot less energy, that didn't need to be replicated? And that's what Project Silica is. And this came out of a piece of work that Microsoft are doing with University in Southampton, where we're actually storing data on glass. So what we can do is, using really, really fast pulse lasers, we can etch into glass. And we can etch into the glass at a particular distance, particular size, and particular orientation. And that's allowing us to store data in bits, 3 bits. And we can do that in such that a 5 by 5 centimeter square of this glass can be used to store 50 terabytes of data. We're also looking at how we can store data in DNA. And a small sample the size of the tip of a pencil can be used to store 100 terabytes. The great thing about Project Silica and the glass is it's almost indestructible. You can do whatever you want to the quartz glass. You can heat it, you can scratch it, you can do whatever you want. The data will still be there, and it's easy to recover that data. We just need lasers, and we just need to be able to read that data off the glass. Of course, when we're finished with the data, there's not a big expensive destruction process. The glass can be melted. So right now, Project Silica is storing about 50 to 100 terabytes of data on small pieces of glass. The objective of this particular piece of research is to be able to bring that capability into our data centers and stop our reliance on old, not very sustainable ways of storing data. Project Sirius is a very similar approach in the networking world. So even with optical networking, there's a lot of conversion that goes on, converting from photons to electrons, so converting from optical networks into electrical. And this has to happen for switching and for routing within the data centers. But it actually happens a lot. So every time that happens, there's energy usage, and of course that builds up over a hyperscale cloud. So what Project Sirius is doing is looking at how can we break the light, the optical networks, how can we break that light, kind of like shining light through a prism into its constituent colors, and use that light then to switch, and actually create optical switches that replace the need to continuously switch from photons to electrons, only do it once. And then the added benefit of that is you're doing it at light speed, so you get faster networks, optical-only networks. And that's a project that's currently underway within Microsoft Research. We already have a chip that can be used to do that, and over the next number of years, we expect to see that roll out within our data centers. The other big problem that we have on the planet right now, I mean, it's obviously with COVID right now, we're very aware of it. But what if when we get past COVID, what if when we get a cure or a vaccine for COVID, what if there's another one right around the corner? How can we use some of this technology to predict global pandemics? And that is really something that Microsoft want to focus in on and work on and help society in this way. So Project Premonition is the beginning of that. We're looking at mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are one of the most dangerous animals on the planet. They carry a lot of different viruses around with them. If we can track mosquitoes, and if we can actually understand how viruses are spreading across the globe, if we can understand how viruses are spreading from mosquitoes or from other animals into humans, we can start to get ahead of some of these viruses, start to get ahead of some of these pandemics. So to explain this, I'm going to roll another video to give you a sense of what we're trying to achieve.
The overall goal of this project is to monitor infectious agents as they move across the planet. So in the end game, we'd like to have a global system available that detects new infectious agents and then monitors their movement as they emerge. In this way, we could intervene before they become an epidemic or before they become an infectious problem for humans or wildlife.
The mosquito is the most dangerous animal on the planet because it carries so many pathogens. What we want to do is to be able to catch that mosquito efficiently at scale and at low cost.
Current collection technologies are very limited and present a lot of biases. When we do this in the field now, it takes a lot of effort and money and personnel time. The big challenge is going to be creating new traps that can collect mosquitoes that's drone portable and that can be automated in a very efficient way.
What our team will do is take the mosquitoes and then deep sequence them. The results of that sequencing will be placed through a series of computational steps that will detect viruses and will distinguish between viruses that are known viruses and those that are novel viruses. So right now, our ability to analyze these sequences depends on computer power. We're going to have to expand our computational power, and we're going to have to develop new algorithms that can process the data much faster.
What we want to apply to achieve a goal like this are our advanced operating systems, analysis tools to find bugs in software before they're in the wild, machine learning and vision to add complex autonomy into these drones so that they can make decisions. And then finally, cloud computing and genomics so that we can at scale analyze the complex data we obtain. I believe in the next 5 years, a system like this is attainable.
So just to summarize, I think, there is a scary future ahead of us if we think about AI in a certain way, if we think about technology in a certain way, which is a disruptive way. We have to take control of it now. We have to think about responsible AI, responsible technology. I think the onus is on every company to really think about that. So when you're working with AI systems, thinking about the ethics around that. I do think we have an alternate future. I think we can save the planet, and I think we can help the human race. We can help people that need it most, and we can do that with this technology if we all put that a significant focus into that. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out our website on innovation. Thank you very much.
Niall Moran, Director of Technology Centre, Microsoft Ireland, thank you very much. Some incredible insights and developments. I particularly like the Seeing AI development, so hopefully we'll hear more about that from Niall. Niall is going to rejoin us for the Q&A at the end of the session. Just a reminder, you can send your questions into slido.com and by email to events@sandyford.ie. Next up, we have Adrian Weckler. Adrian is tech editor, Independent Newspapers. He is an editor of both the Irish Independent and Sunday Independent, in addition to being host of Ireland's most listened to technology podcast, The Big Tech Show. Adrian describes himself as simply as a journalist who writes about technology. He's a journalist who is a winner of multiple honours, including the Irish Internet Association Net Visionary Award and the David Manley Media Award. And on more than one occasion, the Smurfit Business Journalism Award, Ireland's most prestigious business media accolade. So, Adrian, you're very welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you about digital futurology.
Thanks a million. And digital futurology is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start off, though, by looking at what I believe is one of the most under-discussed issues at the interface between tech companies and how we're working at the moment. Now, if you can see the slide that I have up on the screen there, you will be aware that in Budget 2021 last week, there was a broadband tax break announced, and that won't mean very much financially. But what I think that is doing is that is essentially setting us up to work from home forever. At least that's the lesson that we're taking from some of the big firms that have talked about this. Niall was just up before me. Good to see you, Niall. Microsoft is one of the companies that is essentially telling its employees that, subject to their line manager approval, they will be able to work from home for good. Microsoft isn't alone. Indeed, which has about 1,000 people in Dublin, has essentially said the same thing. Dropbox too. Now, on one hand, this sounds like a wonderfully flexible thing, and that's the way the narrative has gone. But there are actually a few problems that I don't think are being highlighted with this from a tech point of view and also from a working point of view. It's not just the difference in what we think our home working environment might be, like a beautiful shomer out the back garden, if you have a back garden. And it's not just the reality ends up, something like this, scattered all around. I mean, I shudder to show you what the floor of this room I'm sitting in is actually like at the moment. The issue for me is more of a generational one, and I think the narrative is wrong on this, and I don't think that nearly as many of us are going to be working from home as we imagine, and the reason I think is a generational one. Most of us, when we talk about this, we talk about it in the context of having, a suburban home with a garden and, 3 or 4 rooms. This right here is an apartment. That's an apartment as well. And that's an apartment. Now, what's common to these apartments it will typically be somebody under the age of 30 living there. Now, what we're kind of saying in our work from home mission to younger people is that for the rest of your life, perhaps, or certainly for the next few years, or when you get out of college, this is going to be your workplace, and it's also going to be where you live and where you sleep. And that brings up this counter argument that you hear on, radio shows with people like me over the age of 35 or 40, who say things like, "But this is fantastic. It's a great liberating thing. Younger people now, they won't have to put up with the massive rents in Dublin. They can move out to somewhere with an awful lot more space. It's going to be a revolution in quality of life." And with the greatest of respect, I'm not sure how many people watching this webcast today remember what it was like when they're 23 or 24. But was your idea of an exciting professional life a bungalow in Leitrim or Longford or Roscommon? And I don't mean to be facetious about that. I mean, it could be a very nice house, for example. It could be somewhere in the Wicklow Hills or, with lots of space and a nice build. The point I'm trying to get across here is that working from home is not something that young people, I believe, are going to flock to. There are lots of other reasons why they want to work in an office. When you're that age, you want to meet people. You want to advance your career. You want to learn how company culture works. These are all very, very important things. Everybody watching this today probably has their own established society, their family life set up, everything organized, and that's fantastic. But it's not the life of a young person. Career progression is another major issue. Whereas most people watching this today have our set relationships. We know what we're doing. We have our bosses. We have our tasks for the week or the month. Younger people don't. They need to physically see and learn what is going on. And that typically happens in offices. It's very, very difficult to do that over Zoom. And like, we slag off offices an awful lot. And I heard it referred to earlier on as a collaboration space, which it may well be. But it's more than a collaboration space. If you're somebody who is younger, it's a place to be seen, to acknowledge. It's a place where you first get your professional respect, where you get confidence, where you literally learn what to do for the welfare of the company. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way because I don't think it's discussed enough when we're talking about the intersection between company, corporate culture, tech, and futurology. Interestingly, the government is now also talking about a future right to work from home, and also the right to disconnect. Now, what does disconnecting mean? I'm not sure how many of you use alternatives to email, such as Slack. I would say most people do. I would bet that most people watching this now have, in the last 6 months, started to become very au fait with the chat function in Teams, for example. WhatsApp, you find more and more work texts and work-related stuff creeping into to WhatsApp. There are two schools of thought on this, and you don't necessarily want to take it from the tech industry, even though I think that's what's going to happen. There's one school which says that you should be able to clock off at 6 o'clock, quality of life. That's probably unrealistic because of all of the tools that we have available to us. This pandemic and this lockdown, I think, has illustrated to most of us what actually happens, and that is that you work up until dinner, you have dinner, and you'll absolutely go back for an hour or two to finish something off. There isn't really an answer for that, because the laws of gravity in a market economy will mean that whoever gets the project in tends to advance. It's an unfortunate kind of American concept, but that's the way it's going. So you probably want to best familiarize yourself with some of those tools. That said, you should plan a pragmatic and a practical way to use your tech when working from home. The setup that I like best is one with a couple of monitors. I also like them at eye level. I mean, for example, the device I'm talking to at the moment is actually an iPad Pro. I have it literally sitting on a cardboard box, rather than, for example, down here, you'd be sort of looking up my nose. It's just a lot more practical. A lot of people don't do that. I'm also have a window right in front of me, which is why my face is nicely lit up. An awful lot of people will do it the other way around, and it looks like a horror film or some sort of dystopian, one of the dystopian shows on Netflix that I think it was Connor was talking about, or maybe it was Niall was talking about earlier on. And it's not just the tech either. When the lockdown started, I got a big, huge chair shipped with all the Tipp-Ex. When you mark the back of your chair with Tipp-Ex to say that it's your chair. I got that shipped out to the house. So those things are expensive. They're £400 or £500, but it makes a huge difference, especially if you're skipping around from room to room. The other thing which is interesting is the rebirth of the stylus. Now, I'm not sure how many of you use, iPads or iPad Pros or any of those things, or Samsung Galaxy Notes. What's happened is that all of a sudden, our decade-long antipathy toward actually using e-signatures and e-documents has suddenly weakened, because we're getting more and more PDFs and more documents online, and it's really easy to sign them with a stylus, like an Apple Pencil or a Microsoft Surface pen. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon, and that leads into the I suppose the awkward and unanticipated demise of the paper-centric office. We've been talking about this for years, this idea of a paperless office. And when you talk to people about it, they would often say things like, "Oh, that sounds great in practice, but it'll never actually happen." Actually, it is happening right now. Now, there are some businesses that I've talked to that have actually implemented it prior to the pandemic. Who you're seeing now is seeing a guy called Larry Fenlon from Lehman Solicitors, and they have a paperless office system, which is terrifying to a lot of conventional Irish business people. But this is it: when a document arrives, they date stamp it, scan it, and it goes into an online tray where it's named, dated, and assigned to a file, and then we destroy the original. Now, there are some originals you can't destroy. You can't destroy property-related deeds and things like that. But that concept, unless we want to start having giant filing cabinets and paper strewn all over our spare rooms, that plus the advent of much bigger cloud storage services is probably where we're going. Another very useful tool that's really only gotten traction in the last 12 to 18 months is voice transcription. And this is an example of Microsoft's relatively recently introduced a transcription service with Office and Word, and it's very, very good. It's a short video here. If you can hear it, you'll hear my voice. They're picking up my voice.
Of the Irish Independent, we're testing Microsoft's new Surface earbuds. They're in my ear. They're taking dictation as I speak, even with some considerable background noise. It's pretty impressive.
Now, the advantage to that is not just for somebody like me, it's apparent. If I'm doing an interview, I can literally put my phone down in front of them, and it will transcribe everything from voice to text. Not perfectly, maybe 80 to 90%. Struggles with some Irish accents. Southwest, actually, mostly. Kerry, pretty difficult. Good for most of the rest of the country. But the real advantages in business and for working are meetings and seminars and things where you need to take notes. You might want to listen back or to look back. The service I use is actually called Otter, or I have up to now, because I subscribed to it about a year ago. It gives you 600 minutes for free, and then it gives you 6,000 minutes per month if you subscribe to it. And you can also import audio files into it. So if you record something on your phone or a dictaphone or something, you can actually drag and drop it on your laptop or in your phone into the Otter app or onto the Otter website, and it will actually transcribe it from the Otter. Really, really helpful. And that tees us up for something that Google is working on. Microsoft, as we've seen, is working on as well. Apple is working on it as well. And this is the idea of a universal translator, of something that can actually, literally, if I am talking to a Japanese person and they're talking to me, I have my AirPods in, or whatever it is, and I'm talking in English, and in real time it is translating not just to text, but also to voice into their ear. That's something that's not actually far away. Google's pretty close on working on it. The reason that Apple is behind on that, by the way, is you probably remember the controversy over recordings being listened to by humans from Amazon Echo. I'm not going to say the Alexa word because it'll probably zing off lots of devices in your backgrounds. But Google and Amazon and Apple all got criticized heavily for allowing contractors and staff to listen in to physical recordings that were made by people using these voice services. They were doing so for testing purposes, just to make sure that the actual recording synced up with what was being transcribed correctly. But it wasn't totally clear that they were doing that. But Apple has a much more privacy-centric view, which is good in one way, but on the downside, it means it's not as good at voice tech as either Amazon or Google or even Microsoft, which is why, for example, at Siri, so sorry, I said the Siri word. Sorry if things are zinging off right now, but SIRI, it's a bit more hit and miss, you'll probably find, than your Amazon Echo, for example, at home. Now, other things. Are any of these things going to be game changers in tech or in the way we work in the next few years? 5G. So we've just had, the little clicker I'm using today is actually it's not, but I got the iPhone 12 Pro there. Very nice phone, by the way. If anyone wants to know any more about it in the Q&A, go ahead and ask me. It has 5G, as do most of the flagship phones. The three main networks, all have launched 5G networks now in Ireland: Vodafone, 3, and Air. And this is me standing outside a spar with a small 5G antenna on the top of it and recording a typical speed of 290 megabits per second. Is that a game changer for business in Ireland? A lot of people say that it is in the medium to long term. In 2020, it's not. In 2021, it probably isn't either, unless you happen to be in a niche like a mixed reality, augmented reality, some sort of advanced Internet of Things niche, or you happen to have a self-driving car ready to go next month and you need the 5G network. But assuming that that's not the case, 5G won't be a game changer in the short term. In fact, one of the interesting things about reviewing the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 12 Pro is, although we're all glad 5G is there, nobody's really excited about it. Nobody can articulate in one sentence what will be different if you have 5G. So I would say yes in the medium term, no in the short term. Folding phones like Samsung's Galaxy Fold 2, is that going to be a big thing? If you have $2,000, sure, because almost none of the folding phones cost less than 1,700 or 1,800 euro. I had the Galaxy Fold, by the way, for a while. It's a very nice device, with one exception. You end up not folding it out on the street because you just look like a weirdo. Now, at home, you might do that if you're sitting on the couch, and it's kind of good there. 2,000 euro, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Apple's not interested in that yet, and that tends to be a pretty good barometer of things. Now, what about this? Here's a little video. future delivery in a number of countries, possibly including Ireland. And this is the way they see it. They see a supply chain line with the item being boxed up, whizzed off by drone within a couple of kilometers, land safely on somebody's lawn. He's not stoned or bricked by feral youths setting off bangers. So in other words, they haven't trialed it in Ireland. And the slightly interesting looking individual picking it up there. But anyway, is that going to be the future for shopping? Well, actually, in Ireland, there are some who think it is. So you probably have read about Bobby Healy, who has a company called Mana Aero. And that company is on its second or third round of trials. At the moment, it's doing trials in Oranmore and Galway. It did trials before in, I think it was around Athlone or somewhere in the middle of the country. And it is pretty aggressively trying to grow a drone delivery business. It has done a deal with Flipdish, which is the box you see here in its photo, which is a food delivery service. But it has also done other deals. It's done one with Tesco, for example, to try out Tesco deliveries. Now, there are a lot of challenges and issues with that, and not just the facetious one I raised with young fellas using it as target practice. There are regulatory issues around use of the skies above our homes. There are very, very significant privacy issues. There are also noise pollution issues. I fly drones, and most of them are pretty noisy, even when they're a good 100 feet up in the air. Now, these ones are fairly state of the art. They probably, by the time they get a commercial license, won't be particularly noisy. But anyway, that's the way that's going. Then I can't really talk about the future without talking about robots. Maybe this narrative has been done a little bit to death, but I'm still a big believer in it. In other words, the idea that an awful lot of our jobs are going to be automated. Now, before you panic and reach for your doomsday pills, the conventional wisdom is that automation will happen. Robots will take some of the jobs that you and I are doing at the moment, but that the interim period between the time that they boot us out of our office chairs in our work from home spare rooms, we will actually have gravitated either naturally, competitively, or through some other way to different, better jobs, higher jobs. So this is actually a live link. You can actually click on this link, willrobotstakemyjob.com. If you're doing something idle while you're watching this presentation, go ahead and put it in a browser, and it will invite you to put in your job description, and then it will give you a percentage score chance of whether or not a robot's going to take your job. It's actually kind of fun. It's also terrifying. But there's good and bad news. So the most at risk are functions you might think. So things like cashiers and drivers. That's unfortunately that's one that's heavily at risk because of automated vehicles. But accountants, that's a very, very big one. There are a lot of examples of big accountancy companies doing trials with with automated software that does more and more stuff. Least at risk are quite a lot of jobs and professions that will probably never really be fully automated. A lot of things like around mental health, obviously, a lot of medical jobs, surgeons, but things like installers, like someone to come around and put in your Virgin or your Sky broadband, or a plumber. Like, it's going to be a good 20 or 30 years before one of those Boston Dynamics robots can actually come around and unplug your drain in the right spot. Anyway, that's robots and automation. But there is a kind of universal consensus that it is coming. 9% of all jobs currently under threat, says the OECD. Oxford says half of all jobs in 20 years. That's a little bit dramatic. That assumes that we're all doing exactly the same jobs in 20 years. And speaking as a journalist or in the media, We genuinely live on the proposition that we'll be doing something completely different in 4 or 5 years anyway. One issue I have to address before we get close to the end of this presentation is the near future and data transfers and Brexit. And this is a very, very thorny issue. I was talking to a guy called Nick Clegg, former Deputy British Prime Minister, and now the global affairs boss in Facebook, hired by Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. I was talking to him yesterday for an interview that's going out actually in tomorrow's newspaper. And this is one of the things I was putting to him. In a no-deal Brexit scenario, which now looks more and more likely, what happens to data transfers and a huge swathe of digital business going in and out of the UK, from Ireland and also from Europe into the UK? And he didn't actually have an answer. He said Facebook is working on contingencies, but this is one of the least discussed issues with a no-deal Brexit. The last time I interviewed Helen Dixon, Data Protection Commissioner there, I took a photo of her after I interviewed her. I asked her, in a no-deal scenario, might data flows between public bodies in the UK and Ireland, and that would be private bodies as well, become illegal? And Helen Dixon said, yes, in a no-deal situation, that is possibly the case. I don't think we're ready for that. I think we're all assuming that it will sort of sort itself out. The problem with assuming that it's going to sort itself out is what's happening at the moment between the EU and the US, with the Irish Data Protection Commissioner, who's on your screen there, and Facebook caught in the middle. Right now, there's a High Court case where Facebook has challenged the Irish Data Protection Commissioner's order to them to stop transferring data from the EU to the US. Now, I'm simplifying it, but that's essentially what the Irish DPC has ruled. She's given them a preliminary order, and that was on foot of a very, very strong European Court of Justice case 6 weeks ago. The issue here is that we all assume that this will somehow get papered over, because it has been papered over for years with various treaties and agreements, like the Privacy Shield arrangement between the EU and the US. The core problem here is we're now down to brass tacks. The EU and the US do not agree on acceptable standards of security. The US believes fundamentally that it is okay to monitor a lot of digital communications as part of its national security remit. The EU believes fundamentally that it is not okay to do that because we have a fundamental right to privacy. And it's very difficult to see right now where the twain are meeting on that. Helen Dixon is caught smack bang in the middle because Facebook has its headquarters here in Dublin, as does Google, and as do a whole host of other digital firms. Ireland is caught right in the center of this, and the stakes here are absolutely enormous. The quote that Nick Clegg gave to me last night was that we need to be ready for data transfers to grind to a halt around Europe. Grind to a halt. Anyway, not to scare you too much, but this is a very, very significant part of our tech and digital future. It's not all about hardware. It's about transfers and that kind of stuff as well. There are, by the way, other ways to transfer data, as lots of people watching this webcast will know. I know anyone in Microsoft will certainly know that. And I'll wrap up with a related point, and that is, in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years' time, what kind of a world are we going to have? So 2 weeks ago, that is the Chief Technology Officer of Huawei, Paul Scanlon, who I interviewed 2 weeks ago for my podcast, which was referenced there by Connor. And what's happening is that the world is splitting into two fundamental digital and tech zones, the US and China, and Europe is caught somewhere in the middle. But Europe has aspirations to be a third pole. And how is this manifesting itself? A ban on Google from Huawei phones, a potential ban on TikTok in the US, the Chinese having a digital firewall for Google and Facebook and Twitter and other services in China. I'm not sure if any of you have been to China. I was there 18 months ago, I was in Shenzhen, where a lot of the big tech companies have their bases, and you go over the border from Hong Kong, and unless you are using your own phone on roaming, you don't get access to any of your digital services. So yes, I downloaded WeChat. Yes, I downloaded the Chinese equivalent of Google Maps just to see what they were like. But that's the world we're entering. And for anybody with aspirations to doing business in the US or in the Far East in China, China is going to be the major digital economy in 10 years' time. It's well worth thinking about these things. So that's all I have. I know we don't have much time today to talk about these things in depth, but I think we're staying for a Q&A if there are any issues arising from that, or if you want to talk about the iPhone 12 Pro.
Adrian Weckler, thank you. Fascinating and frightening at the same time. You're going to stay around for the Q&A. I'm just going to invite John and Ken back, and also rejoined by Niall Moran. And I'm going to hand you over to Jared Corcoran, Director, Sandyford Business District, who will moderate the Q&A. So thank you. I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you, Conor. And we had 4 amazing presentations there. From John Shaw, initially about quantum computing and its applications to digital wellness and healthcare, followed by Ken Finnegan of Tangent and TCD, and innovation as a service, or the approach of Tangent to innovation. Followed by Niall from Microsoft on Good AI, and there are some very interesting case studies on for example, the application of AI for blind people, helping them see. And finally, with Adrian on working from home and the digital broadband tax and so on and so forth. So there's a lot there. And there are some questions coming in on the question and answer. But firstly, I'll go through the same sequence again. If I could ask John on quantum computing. And yesterday we had Professor Martin Curley, and he was talking about how we went, they had a 5-year plan, and they're implementing it very, very quickly because of COVID-19. And I was wondering, how do you see that the private sector can help the HSC, Sláintecare and so on and so forth, to build up our capabilities in the wellness and healthcare sector, because this is our #1 priority at the moment. This week we're entering into wave 2. Maybe next week, maybe next year there'll be a 3rd wave, who knows? But this is an absolutely critical problem which has to be solved, and healthcare is at the front line of that. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that. John Shaw? Okay, so John is not picking us up there. So Ken, are you able to hear me?
Perfectly, yeah.
Very good. Okay, Ken, I'll move on to that. I was very intrigued by your prediction that the future of AI was working from home in our PJs, but I'm sure there's a lot more. That's probably the immediate future during COVID-19. I know that you've been involved in the TCD project for the Grand Canal Innovation District, which is a major strategic move by Trinity to build an innovation hub in the heart of Dublin. I wonder if you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a really exciting initiative. It's over €1 billion investment into developing an innovation district, Grand Canal Innovation District. It's been modelled, I guess, from global leaders in innovation districts. So we've gone to places like Kendall Square in Boston, where the idea of bringing together large corporates, startups, SMEs, academic institutions, government agencies together. It's like the quadruple helix of innovation, if you want. It's like, I spoke earlier on about the importance of diversity and diversity of thinking when it comes to innovation, but actually as a macro scale, when you bring all these types of organizations, when you bring the academics, the government agencies, great things can happen. And I think a really great example is Kendall Square over in Boston, where they've achieved just that. It's a hotbed for pharmaceutical companies as well, and you know what, it's again looking at the examples that John gave earlier on, that idea of using artificial intelligence with in chemistry, for example, you're bringing together these minds geographically closer together and creating kind of like a I don't know, an epicenter, if you want, for innovation, an epicenter for new ideas. It's a place where companies will establish kind of like research and development teams. They'll have access to the best minds from not just Trinity, but from academic institutions across Ireland, as well as from a tangent perspective, we'll be looking at running our own incubators and accelerators there as well. So you'll have that really rich ecosystem and fertile ground for new ideas, new companies, new innovations within organizations.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Niall, I'll go on to you. Fascinating presentation on good AI, because we often hear of AI as being an existential challenge to humanity, and robots are going to take off and so on and so forth. So it's good to see applications where it's applied for good. I was fascinated, obviously, about the application for blind people. I know there are applications for deaf people. I was fascinated by the application, the use of DNA. I founded a group called Outside Ireland, which is direct-to-consumer genetics. We've 7,000 members. So I'm very interested in DNA, but using DNA for storage. How soon do you think, or how far away is this? When do you think it will be used in data centers?
Well, I don't think it's going to be very, very long, to be honest. I mean, go back to what I said earlier on. We have this commitment to be carbon negative in the next 10 years. So Satya, our CEO, is very clear that in order to achieve that, we have to do things differently. We have to store differently. We have to process data differently. So all of these research projects, look, with any research project, it's almost how long is a piece of string, right? In terms of when is it going to be ready for prime time. But it's and then you think about some of the stuff Ken was talking about the, you know, the pace of change. And I think something culturally that Satya, our CEO, brings to the company as well, where he sees research, he sees it infused into the business. He doesn't see it as a separate thing, you know, which is probably the way it was seen in the past. It's actually infused right in. So some of the research we're seeing, Project Silica, for example, in terms of how we store data differently, that's a combination of our Azure engineering team and Microsoft Research and Southampton University. So we should see the results of that in the next 5 years, you know, and it will just become part of the data center, and it will just become how we store data, okay? And that will have a knock-on effect for how data is stored right now and the supply of that and all of that. And that's how data centers have been evolving over the last number of years. You know, how we create hardware. Networking is done from is all software-based now as opposed to hardware-based. So the big routers that cost $1 million to put in at the end of a rack are gone, replaced with software. The DNA question, I don't know the answer to that. I'd love to know the answer to that, but certainly Silica is there. We're able to store data on it now. It's a case of how do we, and this is where a lot of research is required as well. The universities do a really great job of researching the concepts, improving the concepts, turning those concepts into something that can run a hyperscale cloud is where really Microsoft focus, because that's a big research project in itself. But the DNA question, I'm gonna avoid answering that one because I just don't know the answer to it.
Okay, and just follow-up question. You know, Microsoft are in Ireland. They have a major presence. Yep. They have a major presence in Dublin. and they have a major presence in our district, in Sandyford. I presume that AI for Good is a global program, but do you have specific capabilities for AI which are focused on the Irish market?
We actually have a really unique position in Ireland and in Sandyford, because we're the only site outside of Redmond actually that has all of the different business units for core Microsoft business units, data center operations, engineering. So I do believe we have a fantastic opportunity to do something differently locally, outside of the bounds of Microsoft kind of structures. And we have a governance team on site that think about those things, so that we can break free of corporate structures and do something for Ireland. And we've done a lot of that stuff. Even in AI for Good, we've seen research projects come through that program from Ireland as well. I worked myself on the Smart Stadium Croke Park project. So it's great to be able to do things from an Irish perspective. I think the best example of it is probably DreamSpace, our education program. That's something that we created locally. It wasn't a Microsoft program. And we've gotten, how many kids through, I'm not sure, but we've gotten a lot of kids through to see what the future of technology looks like. And it's a fantastic example of what we can do locally. And we want to continue to do that.
And I'll move on to Adrian. Adrian, we had a session this morning with Jamie Arbin of Rethinking Humanity, and he was going through the big technological movements in history, and he highlighted the information industry, which of course was changed profoundly by the invention of the printing press. Right? And he said that the disruption we're going through in this decade is equivalent to that disruption in the information industry. How do you see, would you agree with that? And how do you see AI and these disruptive technologies affecting your industry, which is the information industry?
Well, you can't pick a better industry to talk about disruption than media. When you talk about AI, you talk about algorithms, you talk about direct distribution. So when I started in journalism in 1999, people used to read the Irish Times letters page. If you got a mention on a radio show, it was a big deal. Now, I'm not saying it's not a big deal now, but the distribution, the ways in which people get information now has changed so quickly and so rapidly. And I mean, I use that myself. I use that across, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. But if you talk about disruption and AI, there's a massive change going on at the moment. We saw Flashpoint last week when, in the upcoming US election, the New York Post, very big newspaper, ran a story, controversial story, with disputed facts in it, over an alleged laptop allegedly owned by Joe Biden's son. New York Post ran it. Twitter stepped in and blocked the URL to that story, that New York Post story. Facebook stepped in and slowed its circulation. But that's the first time I can remember when the new media, I suppose the platforms and the instruments that most of us now actually, that more and more of us, I'm not quite sure if it's yet most of us, but more and more of us do get our information from, actually stepped in and blocked one of the mainstream newspapers, sort of the old keepers of the information gate, from actually disseminating the story on the platform. It caused a huge storm. And I think we're going to start seeing more of that. So they're under a lot of pressure. The platforms are under an awful lot of pressure now because they've such great reach. Like in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Except nobody can really decide how they should exercise that power. Should Facebook be going in like a newspaper editor or an editorial board and reaching in and deciding on a story-by-story basis what should be allowed on its platform and what is correct and what is not correct and what has been adequately fact-checked? Very, very difficult problem. And to come back to artificial intelligence, an awful lot of this comes back to algorithms and AI. If you talk to somebody like Nick Clegg, who I was talking to yesterday, or Zuckerberg, who was here in Dublin last year, a couple of us met him to talk about this. They will say that their AI is getting better and better, that they're able to remove an awful lot of nasty stuff before people even see it. It's still very, very problematic. Those algorithms are still intensely problematic because we're seeing filter bubbles. What you see every night you sit down, Jared, to, for your 3 hours on YouTube Premium. I'm not sure if you do, but what you see is radically different to what I see, which will be radically different, to what Ken or John or Niall will see. They're filter bubbles. That's AI. And there's you introduced this concept, this precept of, the printing press of and AI. And there's I think it's undeniable that it's disruption, but it might also be a polarizing disruption. We may now also be sort of being pulled apart in the media that we consume. And the only time we get together maybe is for the Late Late Toy Show, Like that's kind of, we're getting to that point.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. I believe we have John back again. John, can you hear? Great. I see you waving. John, just go back to that question. Our number one problem in the country at the moment is COVID-19. It's brought the economy to a standstill almost. We can't go on for much longer, I believe. And the key to this is modernizing our healthcare system. And in the recent budget, I believe half of it was allocated to COVID-19 measures, the largest budget ever in the state. And a good part was also allocated to Sláintecare. And that'll be the HSE. How can the private sector, how can technology help Sláintecare achieve its objectives moving forward?
Thanks, Jared. So Ireland is uniquely placed to do some amazing things in this area. Nowhere else in the world do you have all of the big tech companies co-located with big pharma, big biopharma, and big med tech. They're all in Ireland, and they're all in Ireland in depth. We have a huge opportunity to get those four silos to look at things differently and to look across how they can collaborate in this unique place, which is Ireland. Martin has great vision. Martin Curley has great vision for what's possible. The concept of having a living lab, or having indeed many, many living labs. Martin is a huge supporter of a whole range of startup tech companies like patientempower.com or webdoctor.ie. And we have this opportunity in Ireland to fast deploy ideas that otherwise would be difficult to do. So Ireland, with 5 million people, is an amazing opportunity. The research that's been done with Genuity in UCD, Europe's largest genome bank, 500,000 genomes on file. All of the great things, Huawei have their global mobile development lab in Dublin. Now I mentioned all the great work Microsoft are doing. That's replicated with all of the other sectors I mentioned. But I think it all has to begin with a vision. Our car, my car, your car, our cars are better managed in their health context than we are. Real-time data, your air pressure in your tire is low, you're running out of oil, you've run out of petrol. The equivalent technology is available for people in the form of wearables. Real-time data can be collected. The technology already exists. We talked about AI. We talked about machine learning in this summit. All the elements are there. It requires a vision to pull it together. So the vision might well be to treat a human being from the perspective of health in the same way as we treat a car or an airplane. So when you buy a brand new car, you don't expect it to fall to bits after 3 years. It's all down to proactive management. Look at anti-collision, look at anti-lock brakes. All these technologies exist in the context for humans for onboard measurement, real-time monitoring. So if you know your genome, which is easy and cheap to find out now, you know what you're susceptible to. If you're wearing the right instrumentation, you can identify problems with your body temperature, your salt level, your heart rate, etc. And there are so many things we can do with this. So a vision statement might be that every person is healthy from cradle to 100 years. You ask a person, do you want to live to be 100? And they say, no way. Ask someone who's 99, do they want to live to be 100? you get a different answer, right? Now, the image of being 100 in an oxygen tent surrounded by your relatives is not an appealing image. But what about if you're healthy at 100? And people do live to be 100 healthy all over the world. It's not impossible. It used to be considered impossible for a television to last 5 years, you know? So the technology is there. We have this amazing opportunity to get the different sectors to look slightly peripherally, right, as I mentioned them. And with a visionary like Martin Curley in HSE, we have somebody who is a catalyst for change by getting people together. So as part of that, I've been, myself and others, we're working with Martin on a concept to create in Ireland a digital wellness innovation institute. We already have 18 organizations interested in getting involved in this. And for those of you listening, if you're interested, please contact myself. I can share with you what we've achieved so far. We're only at the very start of the idea. If we have a big, ambitious vision, everybody's healthy to 100. It sounds crazy. It used to sound crazy that a TV could last 5 years. It used to sound crazy that a car could be self-drive. It's not crazy. The technology's there. We just need to get the vision and the action together, get a couple of quick adopter programs going, and Ireland becomes a center for great things for health. COVID-20, COVID-21, COVID-22, they're all preventable. Early detection, early intervention, it's all preventable.
Okay, thank you, John. And I'll ask Ken. Ken, we heard about the Grand Canal Innovation District. This is suitable for a city, and this solves the problem of Dublin and hopefully brings an innovation hub into Dublin. How about the rest of the country? I was involved on a project in Ludgate Hub, which was really reviving a town which was frankly dying, right? And they brought in gigabit broadband, they brought in co-working, they brought in innovation, and it really led to the renaissance of the town. And recently, I've seen the National Broadband Programme have brought gigabit broadband to about 20 different community centres around the country. I would like to see it in every village and town in Ireland. How do you see innovation going out to our rural towns, county villages, and yes?
Yeah. So, you know, when I was in IDA, like we used to, when we promote Ireland, we talk about the size of the country. You know, it's small enough to try, large enough to prove. And there is great focus from government currently and for the past few years from a regional perspective. And I think you'll see, like, for example, Enterprise Ireland and their investment into, I sit on the advisory board, for example, in the RDI hub down in Killorglin. I think you see these hubs starting to open up all around the country. There's a proliferation at the moment of innovation hubs in all major towns and cities around the country. I think these offer a good opportunity for, yes, this idea of co-working. But I think what we need to see next is the idea of bringing like a programmatic approach to the innovation hub. So bringing like innovation and entrepreneurial courses or activities to these hubs. And actually, from a Tangent perspective, we are working with multiple hubs. I'm really happy to say this: the Human Capital Initiative, which is a fund from government, Trinity did pretty good in terms of receiving funding from that, and also Tangent. And we do have funding to roll out programs in 5 regional hubs around the country. But also in addition to that, you know, there is a lot of activity happening, but it's discrete, and it's like from, as I mentioned in my presentation, Tangent has rolled out courses, approximately 10 different courses in locations from Athlone, Wexford, Waterford, Tipperary Town, in innovation and entrepreneurship. But that's just us. That's just Tangent doing it by ourselves. I think if there needs to be a bit more coordination in terms of the programs and programmatic approach to these types of activities from a regional perspective. The infrastructure is in place now. The hubs are opening up all around the country. Now it's time to layer on and take a strategic approach from government to kind of like bring it all together. There are exciting activities in our plans to get regional reach in terms of delivery of different activities. But as I said, that's just a tangent and the Trinity approach. It would be great to kind of like see some type of policy that it kind of like helps us accelerate what we're doing.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I've just had a time check. So I'll have two quick questions, and probably some which the public are asking, and I'll ask you, Niall. How do you see the adoption of AI in the Irish market, and which companies are leading the applications in Ireland?
From our perspective, yeah, I mean, we, especially in the last year, have seen a big uptick in adoption. Now, adoption means a couple of different things when it comes to AI. I would say there are companies that are adopting AI tools. In other words, they're going out to market and they're looking at tools that are doing more automation than they would have done in the past. Maybe they're looking at, you know, bots and intelligent chatbots and things like that a little bit more than they would have in the past. So definitely seeing adoption of those types of tools. In terms of companies building AI capability, that's a different story. Okay, certainly you will see, you know, the bigger companies, maybe the banks, utility companies, are starting to think about data science, starting to think about the capabilities that are required to build AI capability within the organization, and probably very early stages in that regard. But apart from that, I think it's still early stages in Ireland. A lot of companies still doing a lot of trend analysis and business intelligence. So they're collecting data within the organization, they're looking at data, but they're not going maybe that step further where they're using that data to train models to predict things just yet. Yeah.
Okay. And a final question for Adrian. Adrian, I know you were very much involved in reporting on the National Broadband Programme. Given the situation we're in with COVID and the requirement for people to work from home, and that includes people in rural areas and so on and so forth, is there a case to be made for the acceleration of the National Broadband Programme? And what's your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, there is. It will, my understanding from talking to both Eamon Ryan, who's the Minister of Communications, and to David McCourt, who is the chairman of the company rolling out the National Broadband Plan, is that it likely will be sped up slightly, but only slightly. So the contract is actually for 7 years. It's for a 7-year build out. What they're talking about is moving some of the incremental final stage build in year 6 and 7 back into year 4 or 5. So they're not going to build more than I think it's 7,900 premises by the end of this year and a further 115,000 next year. That's unlikely to be sped up. One interesting side point about the National Broadband Plan is it is amazing how quickly the narrative has changed about that. I remember going on programs like Prime Time and debating with people about whether it was a waste of money, or, you know, why can't we just use 5G? Why can't we use satellite broadband? Why can't we wait for Elon Musk's Starlink? There's not as many people complaining about the idea of solid, reliable, universally available fiber broadband to, you know, 500,000 rural homes. Yes, it's going to be expensive, likely around 2 billion, more so than 3 billion. But it's very hard to dispute the strategic importance of that. I mean, there was talking, you know, Microsoft. Last time Brad Smith was in town, the president of Microsoft, I had the fortune to interview him, and this is one of his big things: is, you know, people in rural areas having access to decent broadband. It's an absolute enabler. All of those slides that I was offering earlier on about bungalows in Leitrim and Longford and Roscommon, whatever about being away from society and your peers, at least if you've got decent broadband, there might be some reason to go there, or if you have a family. So yes, I think that it will be sped up slightly. And I think that an awful lot of the moaning and the whining about it has receded.
Well, it remains for me at this stage to thank our 4 great speakers. Thank you, John Shaw, Ken Finnegan, Niall and Adrian. And at this stage, I'll hand over to Connor so you can tell us a little bit about tomorrow's program.
Yes.
And Niall, I'll go on to you. A fascinating presentation on good AI, because we often hear of AI as being an existential challenge to humanity, and robots are going to take off and so forth.